At my son's school award party, Mom found his trophy in the dumpster. My sister smirked. He didn't earn real attention anyway. I picked him up and left without a word. Next morning, Dad cried, "Please call the hall. They're canceling your sister's retirement dinner." I said, "Sounds fair." Then I hung up. My father called me at 7:14 in the morning, crying, asking me to save my sister's retirement dinner. I had canceled it 9 hours earlier. He did not know that yet. He was still in the part of the story where I was the problem, and Gail was the one who needed protecting. He had been in that part of the story for about 40 years, so I did not hold it against him. I let him finish the sentence he was trying to make. Then I'd said 2 words, then I hung up. The thing about running an event business is that you learn very quickly how much a signature is worth. Not in a sentimental way, in a literal way. The name on the bottom of a contract is the name that makes the decisions. Everything else is just conversation. My name was on the bottom of that contract. My father did not know that. My sister did not know that. My mother, who had told Gail the venue was sorted, as if it were a favor the universe had done her, did not know that. None of them had ever asked how any of it worked, which is its own kind of answer. I'm Reid Calloway. I'm 40 years old. I own Calloway Event Hall in Columbia, South Carolina, 4 rooms, a full kitchen, a permanent staff of 11, and a booking calendar that runs about 8 months out on a good quarter. I built it from a single rented space 6 years ago, after my wife Marlene passed, and I needed something to do with my hands that was not grief. It is not a glamorous business. It is a contracts business. You sign things, you honor things, and you know exactly what happens when someone doesn't. My son Theo is 9. He has Marlene's eyes and my tendency to go quiet when something is wrong, which is useful in adults and breaks your heart in children. The morning of the school award party, Theo stood in the hallway in his good shirt and polished that trophy with his sleeve for a solid 2 minutes before we left. It was a participation trophy from the District Math Olympiad. White plastic base, gold resin figure on top, his name on a silver sticker label. The school couldn't afford engraving for participation awards, so they used sticker labels, and the one on Theo's trophy was slightly crooked. I had noticed it when he brought it home. I almost straightened it that morning. I didn't. It felt like his to have crooked if he wanted it crooked. He was so proud of that sticker label. We drove to the school with the trophy on the back seat in the box the school had given him, and Theo kept turning around to check on it. Not because he thought it would fall, just because it was there and he wanted it to keep being there. I want to tell you about Gail before I tell you what she did, because if I just tell you what she did without telling you who she is, it will sound like a bad day. It was not a bad day. It was the end of a very long pattern that I had been watching for 2 years and telling myself I was misreading. Gail Weston née Calloway is 44 years old. She works in local government HR. She has 2 adult kids and a husband who refers to her opinions as Gail's position on things, in a tone that suggests he has long since stopped having his own. She is the family's measuring stick. Every achievement in the Calloway family gets held up next to Gail's and assessed from there. She has 3 degrees. She bought her house at 31. She chairs a community board. She volunteers on 2 committees. She has never once, in 44 years, had to wonder whether the family thought she was doing well, because the family made sure she always knew. I say this not to diminish her. She worked for those things. I say it because it matters for understanding what she did with Theo's participation trophy. She did not throw it in the dumpster because she hated my son. She threw it in the dumpster because in her internal accounting of things, a participation sticker label from a math Olympiad was clutter on a table that should have held her retirement party centerpieces, and clutter gets removed. That is almost worse. I have been trying to pinpoint when the pattern started. The honest answer is that it probably started before I was paying attention. I was busy building the venue in those early years, busy being Theo's only parent, busy doing the 100 things that need doing when you are a single father running a small business and trying to make sure neither the business nor the child feels like the second priority. I was not watching Gail closely. There was no reason to. She was my sister. She came to holidays. She made appropriate comments about Theo's development. She always said he was sweet. Sweet is a word that does a lot of work in some families. Sweet means well-behaved, unthreatening, easy to manage. Sweet is what you call a child when you cannot think of a specific thing to praise. I heard Gail call Theo sweet so many times that I eventually stopped noticing that she never called him smart or interesting or anything that required her to register him as a person with actual qualities rather than a pleasant ambient presence in her peripheral vision. The specific incident I can point to, the one that should have made me stop and look more carefully, was Thanksgiving 2 years ago. My mother had been talking about a drawing Theo had made in art class. a detailed map of an imaginary country that his teacher had displayed in the hallway. My mother was proud of it in the way grandmothers are proud, warmly and without proportion, which is exactly the right way to be proud of your grandson's art project. Gail had listened, she smiled. Then she turned to her own daughter, who was 22 and had just accepted a position at a nonprofit, and said, "And Lydia, tell everyone about the fellowship application." The conversation moved. The drawing was not mentioned again. It was not a cruel redirect. It was a practiced one. She did not dismiss what my mother had said. She simply moved the room past it to something more worth staying on. I thought about that moment for a day, and then I let it go. I had let a lot of things go by then. You get practiced at it. Gail had always been the loudest room in whatever building she entered, and I had spent 40 years learning to operate at a different frequency. It was easier than arguing. It had always been easier than arguing. But easier is not the same as free. The retirement dinner had been Gail's project for 2 decades. I am not exaggerating. She mentioned it at our parents' anniversary dinner when she was 24. She had a guest list in mind by the time she was 30. By 35, she was discussing venue options at Thanksgiving like a woman reviewing real estate. By the time she was 40, the dinner existed in the family's collective imagination as a fixed future event, the way a child's wedding or a parent's funeral exists. It was always going to happen. The only question was when. When our parents asked me 4 years ago if Callaway Event Hall could host it, I said yes. Of course I said yes. It was a family event and I had a facility. I signed the booking as a favor, paid the deposit myself as a gift to my sister, and told my parents it was handled. My mother told Gail the venue was sorted. Nobody mentioned my name in connection with the contract. Nobody asked who had actually signed anything. The hall was just the hall. It was, in my mother's words, the hall your family uses. I noticed that phrase when she said it. I filed it away. I did not know yet what I was filing it for. The party was on a Saturday in October. Theo's teacher, Ms. Aldridge, a woman in her early 50s with the particular energy of someone who has spent 30 years in elementary education and still genuinely means it, handed him the trophy at the ceremony with both hands. Theo took it with both hands. They had a brief conversation about the math problems on the Olympiad that I was too far away to hear, but I could see Theo nodding seriously and Ms. Aldridge smiling, and it was one of those ordinary moments you file away without knowing why. Gail arrived with my parents about 20 minutes after the ceremony. My mother hugged Theo for a long time. My father ruffled his hair and told him he was a smart kid. Gail said he looked like he'd grown, which is the compliment you give a child when you cannot think of anything specific to say about them. The refreshment table was set up near the gymnasium entrance. Someone had arranged it nicely, little paper decorations, a punch bowl, plates of cookies. Theo's trophy was sitting on the end of the table, which he had placed there himself with a kind of careful deliberateness that I found quietly moving. I was talking to another parent near the door. I do not remember the conversation. I remember the table. Gail stood near the refreshment table talking to one of my cousins, and I heard her say, without lowering her voice enough, "Reid always makes such a big deal of these things. It's a participation ribbon, not a Nobel Prize." I did not say anything. I had heard variations of that sentence my entire life, and I had learned that responding to it was like responding to weather. You couldn't argue with it, and you couldn't stop it, and the best you could do was make a note and keep moving. I went to get my car keys from the parking lot because we had arrived early and I had locked a bag in the trunk. I was gone for 6 minutes. When I came back, Theo was not at the refreshment table. I looked around the gymnasium, found him coming from the direction of the parking lot fence, near the side exit, walking back toward me. He was carrying the trophy with both hands. One corner of the base was cracked. He walked the way children walk when they are trying to seem normal and are not feeling normal at all. That careful, deliberate step that is the opposite of running. He came to me and held the trophy out and looked up. "Dad," he said, "did I do something wrong?" I said no. He nodded, once the way he nods when he is deciding to accept an answer he is not sure about. Then he went back inside to finish his juice. I stood in that parking lot with a cracked plastic trophy in my hands, and I looked across the gymnasium at my sister, and she was already looking at me, and she smiled, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had done a thing and was fine with having done it. And she said, clearly enough for me to read if not hear, "He didn't earn real attention anyway." I picked Theo up from the juice table. I told him we were going. He asked if he could bring the last cookie. I said yes, we left. I did not say goodbye to my parents. I did not say anything to Gail. I carried the trophy in one hand and my son's hand in the other, and I walked to the car and put them both in it and drove home. Theo fell asleep in the back seat. He still had half the cookie. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are waiting for. You were waiting for me to lose it, to drive back to that gymnasium and say the thing that had been building for 2 years. I understand the appeal. I have imagined it myself, the exact version where I stand in the middle of that room and everyone goes quiet and I say the one sentence that ends it. I did not do that. Not because I was afraid to. Because I had learned, somewhere in 6 years of running a contracts business, that the best time to make a consequential decision is never in the first hour after the thing that made you angry. The first hour is for the anger. The decisions come after. I put Theo to bed. I came back to my desk. I opened the booking file for the Western retirement dinner and read through it for the first time since I'd signed it. 14 pages, my signature on 4 of them, the deposit receipt in my name. The cancellation clause on page 9, which gave either party the right to void the booking with 30 days' notice, no penalty if the cancellation originated with the venue owner. I was the venue owner. I read page 9 twice. Then I drafted a cancellation email to my operations manager, Sonia Tran, who had been with me since year 2 and who ran the booking side of the business with a precision I had long since stopped trying to match. I wrote 4 sentences. I did not explain why. Sonia did not need explanations. She needed instructions and she had them. I saved the draft. I did not send it yet. My phone had 7 missed calls. 3 from my mother, 2 from my father, 1 from Gail, 1 from a cousin I didn't recognize. I set the phone face down on the desk and went to check on Theo. He was asleep with the cookie wrapper still in his fist. I took the wrapper out of his hand without waking him and stood there for a moment in the dark of his room and thought about nothing in particular, which is sometimes the most useful kind of thinking. The next morning, my father called at 7:14. I could hear from the first syllable that he had been rehearsing. He had a whole speech prepared about family and forgiveness and Gail not meaning it and Theo being resilient and surely we could all just move past this for the sake of the dinner, for the sake of his sister's big night, for the sake of the family. Please, Reid, please just call the hall and sort it out. He got through most of it before I spoke. Sounds fair, I said. Then I hung up. He called back immediately. I watched the screen. I did not answer. The voicemail notification came through 40 seconds later. I played it once. It was my father's voice, rougher than the first call, saying my name 3 times and then something about my mother being upset and then the call cutting out mid-sentence, which means he had tried to say something and couldn't find the end of it. I deleted the voicemail, not from anger. The same way you file a document you've already read and actioned. You keep what you need and you clear the rest. Then I opened my laptop and sent the draft email to Sonia. She confirmed receipt 12 minutes later with 2 words, Prusset, noted. I closed the laptop and made Theo's lunch. I want to tell you something about running a family business, and I mean a real family business, not the romantic version. The romantic version is that your family understands what you built and respects it and helps you protect it. The real version is that your family treats what you built the way they treat anything they have never had to work for themselves. Like a resource. Like a thing that exists to serve them, not a thing that required 6 years of your life and your wife's life insurance settlement and 11 employees who depend on you making correct decisions. My family called my venue the hall your family uses, the way you call a community pool the town's pool. It belonged to everyone by virtue of belonging to someone they knew. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it because it explains why nobody in my family, not my parents, not Gail, not one of the cousins who'd been at events I'd hosted in that building, had ever once looked at the booking paperwork. They assumed the hall was sorted because someone had told them the hall was sorted. The name on the contract was a detail that lived in a world they had never needed to enter. Gail escalated on day 2. She called me that evening. I answered once because I wanted to hear which version of herself she was going to bring to the conversation. She brought the reasonable version, which was the most expensive one to deal with because it sounded the most legitimate. Whatever is happening between us, she said, in the measured tone of someone who has spent a career in HR, mediating disputes between people whose feelings she did not share, you cannot punish 60 people for it. The cancellation was processed yesterday morning, I said. I hung up. She called my mother. She called 2 cousins. She called her husband, who called my father, who called me again, and this time I did not answer. Through the network that formed over the next 2 days, I learned the version of the story Gail was telling, that I had overreacted, that it was a plastic trophy, that Theo hadn't even noticed it was gone, that I was punishing 60 people over a misunderstanding, that I was being vindictive in a way that revealed more about my character than about hers. Here is the part she did not anticipate. The cousins did not know about the trophy until she told them. She called them to complain about my reaction to something. She had to explain the something. The something was that she had thrown a 9-year-old's award in a school dumpster and sent his father across the parking lot. She explained this while trying to make herself sound reasonable, and the cousins listened, and they were quiet in a way that is not the same as agreement. She handed me the story herself. I did not ask for it. I came into my venue office on the third day and found the trophy on my desk. I had not put it there. I keep a spare key to the office in a drawer at home, and Theo knew where it was because he came to work with me sometimes on school holidays and sat in the corner doing homework while I ran meetings. He had put the trophy on my desk without mentioning it, without asking, without making it a conversation. He had just placed it there, the way you place something in a room where you think it belongs, and gone back to his homework. I did not ask him about it. I sat down behind my desk and looked at the trophy for a long time, and then I pulled up the next week's bookings and went to work. I've thought about that moment a lot since. Theo is 9 years old. He is too young to have a strategy. He was not making a point. He just understood, in the way children sometimes understand things before they have language for the understanding, that the trophy belonged somewhere it would be kept, and he found that place and put it there. He trusted me with it the same way he had trusted me with his question in the parking lot. I needed to be worthy of both. Now, I want to be honest with you for a moment, the way I would want someone to be honest with me. Because I know how this story looks from the outside. It looks like a man who canceled his sister's retirement dinner over a child's plastic trophy. That is accurate. It is also incomplete. A decision is only as legible as the context around it, and I had 2 years of context that nobody in that gymnasium had been paying attention to. 2 days before the cancellation email went to Sonia, I had done nothing but watch and know. Watching and knowing is its own kind of preparation, and what I had been watching, slowly, over 18 months was something so small and so consistent that I had spent most of that time convincing myself I was imagining it. You do that. When you love your family and your family mostly loves you back, you develop a very sophisticated ability to explain away the things that don't fit. But I am getting ahead of myself. There is something else that happened before the confrontation, and it matters. My cousin Patrice called me a week after the party. Patrice is 38, a kindergarten teacher in Greenville, and she has the particular quality of some honest people, which is that she saves things up for a long time and then says them all at once in a way that is clearly a relief to her and a weight to whoever receives it. She called and said she needed to tell me something she should have told me a year ago. Then she told me. At a family dinner 14 months before the trophy incident, my mother had mentioned, warmly and in passing, that Theo had read an entire chapter book by himself over a weekend. She was proud of him. She said so. There was a small conversation about it, the way there is a small conversation about things children do that are ordinary but feel remarkable when they're yours. Gail had listened to this conversation. Then she had leaned toward my mother and said, quietly, and with the particular tone of someone sharing a concern, that she had noticed Theo struggling a little, that it was nothing to worry about, but had they considered having him assessed for learning difficulties? There was no basis for this. Theo does not have learning difficulties. He reads above grade level. He completed a math Olympiad. He is a completely average 9-year-old who is doing fine. Gail said it anyway. Said it in the voice she uses for things she presents as facts. Said it to cancel a compliment. The way you dismiss a piece of furniture you don't want by pointing out a scratch. My mother had shifted the conversation. Nobody had pushed back. Nobody had told me. Patrice said, she said it the same way she says everything, like she was doing us a favor. I sat with that for a day before I did anything with it. The trophy was carelessness, visible, undeniable, and stupid carelessness. But the thing Patrice had told me was something else. You don't invent a child's learning difficulty by accident. You do it on purpose. And you do it because you have decided somewhere in your accounting of things that this child's place in the family's attention needs to be managed downward. That the compliments going his direction are taking something from somewhere they should not be taken from. Theo was 9 years old. He had done nothing to Gail except exist and occasionally be mentioned warmly by our mother. That was enough to make him a problem for her. The full picture came from an unexpected direction, and I want to be precise about how it happened, because the precise version is the only honest one. My mother had left her tablet at the venue 3 weeks earlier after a family brunch I had hosted. I had been meaning to return it. It sat in my office, charged screen face down, while I kept forgetting to drop it off. Every morning I would see it on the corner of my desk and think, drop that off tonight, and every evening something would come up and it would still be there the next morning. On a Thursday evening, 9 days after the party, I was working late reviewing the January booking calendar. I picked up the tablet to add it to my bag for the next morning. The screen woke up. She had left it open on the family group chat. I am not going to pretend I did not read it. I read it. I scrolled back 18 months. I was looking for the dinner Patrice had described. I found it. I also found 2 others. And then I kept scrolling because what I was finding was not one incident, not 2 incidents, but a pattern with a consistency that required either remarkable coincidence or deliberate habit. The first, 9 months ago, my mother had texted the family group that Theo had been picked to represent his class at a school assembly. She had included a photo of the permission slip, which is the kind of detail that tells you she was genuinely proud and wanted to share it, specifically rather than generally. Gail had replied within 3 minutes, "That's sweet. Is he still doing that speech thing? I always thought he'd grow out of it, but he's taking his time." Theo does not have a speech thing. He's a quiet kid. He sometimes takes a breath before starting a sentence. That is not a thing. That is a child being careful with his words, which is a quality, not a deficit. Gail had taken a quality and reframed it as a delay in a group chat within 3 minutes of a proud grandmother's message. The second, 4 months ago, after I had mentioned to my parents that Theo had qualified for the Math Olympiad, my mother had forwarded that news to the group with 3 exclamation points. Gail had replied, "Bless him, he really works hard for it, doesn't he?" 7 words, each one a small reduction. Works hard for it, as if the achievement were a product of effort alone and had nothing to do with ability. As if the reaching were the point and not the getting there. As if a 9-year-old making a district math competition were something to be gently admired for its effort rather than celebrated for its result. It is the kind of sentence that sounds like a compliment until you sit with it for 30 seconds and realize it is the opposite. My parents had received all 3 messages. They had responded to none of them. Not a pushback, not a question, not even the mild deflection that people sometimes use when they sense something is wrong but cannot locate it precisely. They had just read and moved on. My mother had sent a thumbs-up emoji to one of them, which is the response you send when you have seen something and do not know what to do with it. I sat with the tablet in my hands for a long time. They had let it sit the same way they had let Gail take up all the room in that family for 40 years. Not because they thought she was right or because they approved of what she was doing. Because she was practiced at it, and they were not, because she had been doing this so long and in such a controlled register that it had the texture of ordinary conversation, and because standing against it would have required naming it first, and nobody in that family had the vocabulary for it. You cannot fight a thing you cannot name. I could name it. I had been naming it privately for 2 years while telling myself I was wrong. I closed the tablet and set it back on my desk. The retirement dinner was on my calendar for November 14th. The menu tasting was scheduled for 3 weeks out, a Thursday, which Gail had selected because it was the only day that worked for her. She had emailed my mother about the dietary restrictions of 14 of her 60 guests. She had told a coworker, according to Patrice, that the venue was a family place, very nice, very well run. She had bought a dress for the dinner 6 months ago, non-refundable, from a boutique downtown. She was completely relaxed. The dinner was on her calendar and venues don't cancel on family. She had never once asked whose name was on the contract. I scheduled a brief meeting with Aunt Cecile for the Wednesday before the tasting. Cecile Marsh is my father's older sister. She is 67. She has been the quiet spine of that family for 3 decades. The person who never takes sides, who manages every conflict by refusing to acknowledge that a conflict exists, who has maintained a careful and practiced neutrality across 40 years of Callaway family weather. She is the one person in that family whose opinion Gail has spent her entire life managing carefully, because Cecile's approval is the one currency Gail cannot manufacture. I called Cecile and told her everything. Not a summary, everything, the trophy, Theo's question, the voicemail from my father, Patrice's call, the tablet, all 3 messages, all 3 silences. Cecile listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, then she said, "What time is the tasting?" I told her 2 o'clock. She said she would be there at 1:30. That was the whole conversation. The Thursday of the tasting was cool and clear, the kind of fall afternoon that makes Columbia look like it meant to be beautiful. I arrived at the venue at noon. Sonia was already there, running through the week's schedule, her clipboard in one hand and her coffee in the other, which is her natural habitat. I told her what was going to happen at 2 o'clock. She said got it and went to prepare the cancellation letter. I turned the main hall lights off. Not as a dramatic gesture, the hall is not being used. Lights off is the correct operational state. I left the entrance lights on so that anyone arriving could see the door. Aunt Cecile arrived at 1:30. She sat at a small table in the entrance area with a glass of water, her coat folded in her lap. in the manner of a woman who has been waiting patiently for something for a very long time and is finally in the right room. Gail arrived at 2:03. She was wearing a good coat and carrying a folder, which she did at every meeting she attended because it signaled that she had prepared, that she was a person who prepared, that this was a professional context that she was handling professionally. She came through the door and she looked at me and she looked past me at the dark hall, and her face did the small recalculation that faces do when the room is not what they expected. She walked past me. She went to the entrance of the main hall and looked in at the dark. She came back, looked toward the kitchen hallway, looked back at me, walked past me again, checking the second room. I let her check. She came back to the entrance and looked at me, and then she laughed. One short sound. The laugh she has always used when something happens that she has not planned for. The loading screen before the next response loads. I have heard that laugh my whole life. I have heard it when she was wrong about directions and when she arrived at a restaurant to find it closed, and when my father said something at Christmas that she had not anticipated. It is the sound her face makes while it is figuring out what comes next. Then she looked at me and said, "What is this?" I said. The booking was canceled. She looked past me to where Cecile was sitting. Something moved across her face that was not the laugh. She processed the presence of Cecile for 1 beat, 2 beats. Then she turned back to me. "You're doing this," she said, and her voice was very controlled, the HR voice, the mediation voice, over a misunderstanding at a school party. "The cancellation was processed 3 weeks ago," I said. "Sonia has the letter." Sonia stepped forward from the side of the entrance and held out the folder. Gail did not take it immediately. "You're making this into something it isn't," Gail said. I did not answer. I moved something off a table. I did not realize it was his. "These things happen at crowded events, Reid, and you are canceling a retirement dinner over it." I did not answer. "After everything I have done for this family." Her voice went up slightly on the last word, a controlled assent, the kind of emotional lift that is designed to produce a specific response in whoever is receiving it. 20 years I have been a part of this family's events. 20 years. "Sonia has the letter," I said again. She took the letter. She opened it. She read it. Her eyes moved across the page at a pace that told me she was reading every word, not skimming, which meant she was looking for something to dispute and not finding it because the letter had been written by Sonia, who does not leave things to dispute. Then she looked up. "You're doing this over a plastic trophy your kid forgot he had." The room was very quiet. I let the sentence sit in the air for a moment, the way you let something sit when you want everyone present to hear it without commentary. Then I said, "He didn't forget it. He put it on my desk." Gail opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She turned to Cecile. It was the turn of someone who had run out of other options. The way you turn to the one person left in the room who might still have sympathy available. Cecile looked at her. She did not speak. She did not move. She sat with her coat in her lap and her glass of water, and she looked at Gail with the particular expression of a woman who has made a decision and is at peace with it. And that stillness, that complete absence of the rescue Gail had spent 40 years assuming was always coming, landed in the room like something physical. I stepped to the side. Gail left. She took the letter. She walked out through the entrance, and the door closed behind her, and the entrance lights hummed softly in the quiet. Cecile finished her water. She stood and put on her coat. She looked at me and she said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say, and Cecile has always known the difference between useful and not. She put her hand on my arm once, briefly. Then she left. Sonia was already at her desk making notes. I turned the hall lights back on. Then I went to my office and sat down. The trophy was on the shelf where I had moved it from the desk. The name sticker was still slightly crooked. I had not straightened it. It had never been mine to straighten. I had a 4 o'clock booking to prep for. I pulled up the file and got to work. Gail called 4 family members in the next 2 days to rebuild the story. She called it a personal matter that I had blown out of proportion. She used the phrase, "My brother is going through something," in a way that framed my behavior as a symptom of my condition, rather than a response to hers. She told the cousins I was being vindictive. She did not, to my knowledge, tell any of them the specific things she had said in the parking lot or the specific question Theo had asked me. She told them the version where there was a misunderstanding and I had overreacted. The cousins had already heard a different version. She had told it to them herself 10 days earlier, while she was explaining what I had done and why it was unreasonable. They had the original. They were now comparing. 3 of Gail's co-workers, the ones she had personally invited to the dinner and told about the venue, asked her in the following weeks when it was going to be rescheduled. She said soon. It was not rescheduled. It is still not rescheduled. By December, the co-workers had stopped asking. The dress is still in the bag. My father called me one more time 6 weeks after the tasting, I answered. He said he was sorry. He did not specify what for. He said it in the voice of a man who means the apology and cannot bring himself to make it precise, which is its own kind of answer. I said I knew. We talked about Theo's school project for a few minutes. Then we said goodbye. That was the whole call. My mother and I talk on Sundays. She does not mention the dinner. She asks about Theo. I tell her. She tells me about her garden. We are careful with each other in the way that people are careful when something has shifted, and neither of them is certain yet what the new arrangement looks like. It is not warm the way it used to be. It is honest in a way it never was. Gail and I do not speak. She was at one family event in the spring, a birthday party for an uncle. She arrived late and left before dinner. We were in the same room for about 40 minutes. She did not approach me. I did not approach her. That was fine. Some accounts are best left closed. Patrice told me in February that she had heard, from a coworker of Gail's who knew a cousin of Patrice's, that the retirement dinner had become something Gail did not discuss. The coworkers had moved on. The moment Gail had been building toward for 20 years had been postponed into a future that kept not arriving, and after a while the people who were supposed to celebrate it stopped holding space for it. I didn't ask Patrice for this information. She offered it in the way she offered the other thing, all at once as if carrying it had become uncomfortable. I thanked her. We talked about her kindergartners for a while, which is always a better subject. Callaway Event Hall is fully booked through next spring. I hired a 12th staff member in January, guy named Arthur, who had been working banquet service across town and wanted something more permanent. He is very good at reading rooms, which is the most useful skill in this business because every room full of people is its own kind of negotiation, and the ones who understand that last. Theo is in 4th grade now. He does not mention the trophy. He does not mention Gail. He asked me once in November if we were going to Grandma's for Thanksgiving. I said we'd see. He nodded and went back to his homework. He has learned not to ask twice, which is the particular knowledge children absorb when the adults in their lives have stopped making reliable promises. I am working on changing that. He came to the venue on a Saturday 2 weeks ago to do homework while I ran through a booking review. He sat in the corner of my office with his math worksheet and his pencil and his water bottle, and at some point he looked up and noticed the trophy on the shelf and looked at it for a moment, just looked, and then looked back down at his worksheet. He did not say anything about it. Neither did I. There is a thing I want to say to you, and I want to say it plainly, because plainly is the only way it lands. The retirement dinner was not the point. The trophy was not even the point. Not exactly. The point was the question Theo asked me in that parking lot, the 4 words he put in the air and then walked away from without waiting for the answer, because some part of him had already decided the answer was probably yes. No 9-year-old should believe that doing something wrong is the most likely explanation for why his trophy is in a trash can. That belief is not born in a parking lot. It is built slowly, over months of small reductions, of careful word choices, of compliments redirected and concerns invented, until a child learns to ask for less space than he is actually owed. Theo will have more trophies. He will have better ones with engraving and everything. He will also have bad days and average days and days that are just days. None of that will be measured against anyone else in this family, as long as I am the one setting the table. The shelf in my office holds the participation trophy with the crooked sticker label. I did not straighten the sticker. It is his to have crooked if he wants it crooked. Some things you build and someone tries to take them down. You let your documents do the talking. You let the contract say what the contract says. And you clear the space for the people who were always supposed to be in it. That's the whole story. If someone you love has been made smaller by people who should have made them bigger, this one is for you. The question is never whether you deserve the room. It's just about finding the one person with the key. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment if you know the feeling, and subscribe. There's more where this came from.